Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Yeah. Cocked, locked. Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. And today, Patrick is engineering the broadcast. Guineith Isaacs is with us, live in Australia. Welcome, Guineith.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
Yeah, it's really, it's 1 a.m. in Australia?
It's 1 a.m.
Yeah.
I've just woken up.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for being with us. We're going to talk about derelict places and why we should find them, maybe buy some or one, fix them up, and what we can do with them. And I've been doing it. You know, Guineith, as I was thinking about the broadcast, and I mean just a couple seconds ago, these thoughts were running through my mind, that there are so many parallels in the way you think and the way I think. It's kind of quite uncanny. And you'd almost think that we're related. Well, let me start with this. I have been buying rundown places for a long time, starting in, I think, 1978, maybe 1979. I bought my very first home, and it was a kind of a rundown Victorian house, maybe 1890, 1900 at the most. You know, that would be as new, 1900 would be as new as it would be. And it needed, it needed everything. It needed wiring. It needed plumbing. It needed a bathroom. It needed a roof. It needed to have the windows that were broken replaced, and the ones that still had glass in them, they needed to be reglazed. The plaster on the walls was crumbling. And when I say crumbling, I mean you could just walk over to a wall, grab a handful of the wall, and plaster would come off in your hand in chunks. And I would take the walls off, take the lath off, pull the nails out, and put up sheetrock. And I'd insulate them. I'd put in, the plumbing, the kitchen cabinets, everything it needed. And even a heating system, even a chimney. We even pulled on this particular house. We tied a rope to the top of the chimney and pulled it down because it was brick, and it would have fallen. It would have fallen down. So I've been doing this, and that's just the first one. I've been doing this ever since, and then up until recently, maybe 12 years ago, I decided I wasn't going to live in anyone else's mistakes. For me, I decided I'd make my own mistakes, and that's until we built this farm. But until then,
build your own place.
yeah, and make my own mistakes, right?
Yeah.
But there are so many buildings. We can even talk about slave quarters. I've owned slave quarters in my life. The slaves were long gone on the East Coast in Virginia, but there are so many wonderful, wonderful buildings, and the construction then and the construction now is completely different. So, and you live in a place, you found a place that needed some fixing up, right?
That's right, yep. The place that I'm in, it was a derelict farm in about 2003. Oh, this house was built in 1985, okay? It was built by a local hippie couple, and they obviously built it in stages. You can see from the inside, probably they built the kitchen first. as a little one-room place, and then they eventually expanded it to 4 rooms and a laundry and a bathroom. Okay? And, but, you know, it's this hippie couple, the wife, she was a stained glass artist, and she filled the house with, well, I mean, just such beautiful stained glass windows. And they're just, you know, they're not everywhere in the house. They're just in particular places. But you just look up and, you know, there's a beautiful piece of stained glass art, and you think, wow, that was really nice. And it was that the stained glass was actually one of the reasons why I bought this house. And fortunately, the stained glass windows were not knocked out during its derelict stage, although most of the other windows were, which is rather astounding. This house had 13 broken windows when we first moved into it. It had no, you know, this type of house. They get water pressure by pumping the water up into a tank that's on top of a tower. Around here they're called header towers, okay? It still had a tower, but there was no tank on top of it. So something had happened to the water pressure tank. It just wasn't there. And, you know, there was a generator shed or a battery shed, one or the other, but there was the generator belonged to the cellar, and they wanted it back. And so we started out, we moved into the place, and the place was just full of, you know, it was in a disorderly state. And so, you know, but it was cheap. And I could pay cash for it. Oh, yes, and there was only one paddock left. And the boundary fences were not all there. Some of the boundary fences were there, some of them were in bad shape, and some of them were just plain missing. And, you know, the minority, the fences that were against the other properties were, of course, still in good shape. But the advantage of getting such places is often you can get them for a song. You can get them really, really cheap. And sometimes they are extraordinary if you can see what they were once supposed to be. And this place, the people who had it, who built the place, she was a stained glass artist, but they were also gardeners. Okay, and apparently they had the most beautiful gardens when they first put it in, and vegetable gardens, and they had ponds, and you could see where the pond used to be. You could see where the vegetable gardens used to be. But one thing I discovered since moving in here was that they used to specialize in was exotic bulbs. And even to this day, you just randomly get the most beautiful species of bulb flowers just popping up at places where you might never have seen them before. And for the last few years, you know, I've been discovering new bulbs in new places, and whether they've just naturally spread there from seed, or, you know, that the original bulbs are finding their life again now that the garden is starting to be looked after again, is just absolutely remarkable. And but, you know, it's you can get them for a song. This place was 20 acres for $95,000 with a house on it. Which is not expensive, especially when there's like a two-bedroom terraced house in Brunswick, which is a suburb in Melbourne, for $1 million, and the prices in Melbourne go upwards from there, at least in the inner suburbs. And I don't think I would want to live there anyway, because
yeah, I agree with that.
Getting massive violence problems and such like. But, you know, it's if you can do this, if you can learn to do this, you can take a place and you can begin to put it back together again.
Yes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. You know, as you're saying this, I was thinking about one of the properties I wanted to buy when I was younger, back in the 1970s. And it was a church, and it was a country church. So it wasn't like a church that had sidewalks all around it and a parking lot and, you know, big buildings next to it. But it was a brick church in the middle of nowhere. And it was probably well over 100 years old. It was 30 feet by 50 feet. Very small church, very steep roof. It came with everything, all the pews in it. It was ready to go, but it needed, you know, lots of repairs. $33,000 for a 30 by 50 foot church. It's still standing today. It was purchased and renovated and turned into a home, which is what I would have done. And that was probably maybe an acre of ground. I'm willing to bet that church today, I'm guessing $500,000. Well, $500,000 easily, maybe $1 million. Yeah. To rebuild it, yes, $1 million where it is. Absolutely no question about it. You know, in that location. So and it was run down. It was used as a church, and then you know, the church decided it was a Catholic church. The church decided that they needed a bigger building and you know, different location. They built a modern structure, which I don't think holds a candle in style and elegance to this old church, but it was small. And again, I've said this before, that when the priests decide that, you know, the church is too small, well, say more masses. So instead of one mass on Sunday or two, say 3 or 4. Okay, or hold some of them outside, and get the parishioners to come inside, grab some chairs off the rack, put them outside, put them on a patio, and we'll have church outside. We'll be right back. Class Guineith Isaacs is with us, and we're talking about derelict buildings, and you know, maybe we can open some eyes and let you think about if you're planning on buying something, you might want to buy something that needs some work. Maybe a little bit of work, maybe a lot of work, and I can tell you that the buildings that I've bought needed a lot of work. Guineith, I was thinking about one of the farms I bought, actually the very first farm I bought, and it had a house on it, a relatively new house built in the 1980s, and that was going to be our house, our family farmhouse. But on the same farm, now that house that we lived in was on the end of a long driveway, about a quarter of a mile long, maybe a third of a mile long. But near the road, there was a building, an old slave cabin, and I would say roughly 24 feet by 24 feet. Very small. And it was run down, and it was all the owners who had this property up until the point we bought it, let this cabin fall in disrepair. And so the roof had holes in it. It was leaning. When I say leaning, the Leaning Tower of Pisa had nothing on this particular cabin. And it was dangerous. And what was happening is passers-by would see it. We put up a fence, a high-tensile fence around our farm to keep the cows in, and they felt obligated to hop the fence and pry open the door and take whatever they wanted. And after a while, I got sick of it, because by the time I could get from our house and go the, quarter of a mile or so up the driveway to where they were, they could hop in their truck and take off. So it was such a danger, and I was afraid it had a kind of like a cellar underneath it, and the floor was rotten. And anyone who didn't know that could fall in there, and we'd never see him again. Well, I decided to call the fire department, the volunteer fire department, and set it on fire for training for them, because there was nothing salvageable. The timbers were rotten, termite infested. I mean, there was no wood that was usable. There were no roofing materials that was usable. There's no wiring. There's nothing in it that was usable. Just And it was full of things like fertilizer bags that were rotten, lime bags that were rotten, small broken bent parts from farm implements that were not usable. There's nothing in there that was usable. Pieces of bent wire, and just steel wire, nothing. So we set it on fire, and then we put the ashes in what was left in that hole, and then we put some dirt on top of it, and that we removed the danger. But that was one of the old slave cabins that we owned. Then I bought another farm after that, and this farm was. You mentioned you paid 20 acres with a house, $95,000. We paid about the same amount, and you might find a difference in value here in the United States. We paid about $150,000 for 100 acres with a farmhouse, a Victorian farmhouse, but it needed to be renovated. It needed everything, and another slave cabin. And the slave cabin, again, was built around the 1830s, and this one was a little bit bigger. This one was 24 by 32, and it leaned, but the roof was relatively, you could still see the sky through it. But we put a new roof on the slave cabin, straightened it up, and took truckloads of glass whiskey bottles out from under it, and that was what was holding up the foundation. when I say truckloads, I'm not exaggerating. Literally, we had
somebody had a bit of a drinking problem.
Yeah, a drinking problem, and then what do you do with the bottle? You just throw it under the cabin, right? So we put a new roof on it, put new siding on it, put windows in it, and turned it into a small cabin that somebody could live in with a loft. It was really kind of neat, but again, built in the 1830s, 1835 or so. And life was pretty different there. And I wanted to just share this one thought. It had a cemetery on the farm. Now, that was something that was foreign to me. Buying a farm that came complete with a cemetery of the previous owners. No kidding. When we come back, I'll talk a little bit about that. Because how many people do you know that have done that, right? I'll tell you about it when we come back. Now, we're talking about some derelict properties, and what happens on this broadcast is there's no script. And when Guineith and I are on the air together, there's no script at all. I mean, there's hardly any talking points. And today we talked just about derelict buildings and why you ought to consider one. That was it. That's all. That's all the information that she has and that I have. And so I'm off on a tangent here with a couple of the farms that we have bought. But the one I'm talking about, this 100-acre farm that we bought for $150,000 in Virginia, came with a 24 by 32 slave cabin. And I believe that, I know that on this farm there is an area of about 1 acre, which is a private cemetery. And so if you think about it, class, what happened to the people who worked that farm, the slaves and the landowners? What happened to them when they died? Well, they got buried. And where did they get buried? Well, they got buried on their farm. I mean, would you bury someone on someone else's farm? Back then, they buried them, their loved ones and their slaves and their extended family on the farm. So this acre or so of land is fenced in with just a little piece of chain that kind of delineates where the cemetery is. It's mowed. There's a tremendous amount of respect for the loved ones who are buried there. There's a bench there, an old bench, probably, 70, 80 years old, maybe more. And sometimes there are flowers there. And the family of the deceased visit their loved ones on their farm.
Yep.
And it's kind of a nice thing.
Actually,
but I've got to tell
lovely.
you, I've got to tell you that at first, buying a farm with a cemetery in the middle of it was a little unsettling. But after I thought about it for a while, and after I owned it, I thought it was just as nice of a thing as could possibly be. As a matter of fact, so nice that I might even put a cemetery on our farm right here in Missouri. Now, what does it take? Well, you can call your county and they'll say, oh, geez, you can't do that. I don't care what they say. I really don't care what the county says. If I want to put a private cemetery on my farm, I darn well will. And what are they going to do? Are they going to come in with a backhoe? And are they going to excavate whatever I've buried there? I'd like to see that. As a matter of fact, not only would I see that, everybody would see that. I would video it and I'd put it on the internet. And I'd talk about it for years. But you can create a cemetery.
As long as you've got 100 acres of land.
Well, you don't even need that.
In this country, that's the minimum size.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
I don't know about the U.S.
Well, in the United States, in Missouri, they told me that I needed to set aside an acre, and that's not true. That's not true. I just need to set aside an area and mark it so that in the future, people who, if we were to sell the farm and then we get sold and sold and sold, multiple times, at least those who would succeed me would know that there is a cemetery there. I mean, that would be the purpose of marking it. And that's why you see concrete walls around cemeteries, iron fences around cemeteries, long-lasting delineation of where the...
markers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So
the other thing that you have to be aware of, if you're going to have a cemetery on your land, the path to the cemetery must be a public right-of-way.
That's correct.
So you have to be aware of that. And in Australia, in Victoria, because my husband's neighbour had a cemetery on his land, his family had been there, or let me put it this way, he had been born there. They'd been there for a while, and this was up in the Snowy Mountains, this particular farm. And his neighbour had a cemetery on his land, and that's where the family members were buried. But you have in Australia, the land, the cemetery is, your farm has to be at least 100 acres in Australia for it to be eligible to have a cemetery on it. And you have to notify the municipality if somebody dies and if you intend to bury them on the land, and birth, death and marriages, which is a branch of the Justice Department. And you have to notify them that Grandma's died, we have a farm of 100 acres and we're going to dig a hole out the back.
Yes.
And of course they'll still want to know, they'll probably want to have an autopsy. They'll probably want to take the body off you for a while and then return it. But here's the other thing. If you have one of your loved ones die, you have the right to make your own arrangements for their funeral.
That's right.
Okay? You absolutely do. You do not have to let a funeral home make the arrangements for the burial. But if you, most municipalities, they have a burial plot for the residents of the municipality. And here in our municipality, we have a couple of them. And a couple of years ago, one of my friend's sons had a motorcycle accident and died. And he was buried in the old cemetery, ancient cemetery, that's in a town that's probably about 10 kilometres from here. And this cemetery is so old that many of the graves, they're marked, but the headstones, they don't have any other It's like Boot Hill. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But there's still fresh burials being put in there from people who die in that part of the municipality and can think of nowhere better to lie than underneath the gum trees for eternity. And but the council requires that you notify them what cemetery you're locating the people in, and that includes if you intend making a cemetery on your own land, because there's reasons for that. You know, you can't just go having bodies buried here, there, and everywhere. That would be no good whatsoever, and it would cause the police a headache into the future. Yeah.
And you're right. You do not have to have a funeral home take care of those arrangements. You can do that yourself. And, funerals are pretty darn expensive. Weddings and funerals are expensive. And who is the funeral for? It's really, let me put it this way. Having the blood drained out of a body and replaced with formaldehyde seems pretty barbaric to me. Also, I have a friend, one of our instructors at USA Prepares, said to me, we were talking about cremation, and he said, "Hey, Vinny, dying is bad enough, but cremation, you want to add that to it." And, we're just talking about it. And I said, no, of course not. So you don't have to do that. Now, some people are cremated because of space considerations, time considerations, financial considerations. But what I've learned in Missouri, at least in our neck of the woods, the only thing that's required for burial is a body bag. Now, I would certainly want to do more than a body bag. I'd want to have one of those concrete containers. So for me, I think a concrete container.
Mausoleum?
Well, mausoleum to me means like a building that has a roof on it and it's going to be there for centuries. I'm just talking about
places in it where you lay the deceased.
Yeah. What I'm talking about is an in-ground burial with a concrete box that has a concrete lid and it's sealed with tar. And it prevents water from, some water from getting in there. Eventually water's going to get in there. And the deceased is in a body bag inside there. Now what I'm saying is eliminate the coffin and, the silk lining and all that kind of stuff. And why are there, visitations and all that stuff? It's so much money that maybe some people might want to decide that, in these economic times, it maybe would be advantageous just to get that $200 concrete box, get the backhoe guy to come in for $350, get the body bag for, $150, and have your farm cemetery, do it on your farm. Now, you're absolutely right that you have to have access to your farm and or to your cemetery. If it's a private cemetery, you cannot restrict loved ones from visiting that cemetery at reasonable times. Now, that doesn't mean that they can come and have, fireworks and things like that on your farm. No. What it means is if there's a loved one, aunt, uncle, cousin, nephew, child, parent, grandparent, you can't say, look, it's not convenient. You can't come here today. You can't do that. You have to allow access to the cemetery. And I believe that's what you were talking about.
That's right. If you have a look at how a regular cemetery runs, I think they're usually open 7 days, but I think you'll usually find the gate shut at 5 p.m. Or at
and that's
one or
and
the
that's
other.
And that probably dates back to grave robbers, and it dates back to desecration, and it dates back to vandalism.
That still happens.
Yep. And if we didn't have that, you could probably have 24-hour visitation. We'll be right back. Guineith, one of the things that people may think of when they decide to build a cemetery on their private land, that if they ever sell the land, that cemetery may affect the land selling price in the future. it may decrease it, because not everybody is comfortable with having dead people buried on the land that they're calling their own, right? I don't have a problem with it. Right. So I don't have a problem with it. So, you know, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense to have, if you have that enough land to do that, that you have your own cemetery. Why entrust the care of your loved ones that are deceased to other people? Why do that? So, just a thought. And you know, those are just a couple of things that I have done in the past in terms of old buildings. Guineith, I bought an apartment building that needed a lot of work, had multiple units in it, and it was an old brick building. It was really nice. It just needed six separate heating systems, a lot of plumbing, you know, those kinds of things, and windows, and it was a pretty big project. And the problem is I like doing everything myself, which, you know, the bigger the building, the harder it is to do everything yourself. But I would love to buy a castle, wouldn't you?
I think a castle might be a bit big for little old me.
Well, it'd be big for me, too.
But I'll tell you what, there's a show that's on TV. It's called Grand Designs, and it has the occasional castle that's being bought for renovation. And the people who buy these sorts of places generally have quite deep pockets.
Yeah.
And so, you know, usually with a castle you'll find that it costs just as much to renovate it as what it cost originally to buy. That's a good ballpark figure. So, but at the end of it, you've got an absolutely outstanding house. But you know something, the thing is, whether it's a castle or whether it's a slave cabin or a adobe mud brick hippie house out in the middle of the forest, there's a very good reason to buy a rundown property and fix it up. And that is that there's so many rundown properties all over the place. Okay, they're absolutely everywhere. Because people, I think that there's been a number, over the last 30 or 40 years, there's been one after another, just economic shocks, economic recessions, depressions. There's been bankruptcies, and there's been, you know, people have had to have homes foreclosed on. And if somebody doesn't care about these places, nobody will care about these places. And, you know, there's a guy who does lectures, and he puts out YouTube videos, and his name is called James Howard Kunstler, and he lectures on architecture, and he says something very interesting. He says, when you get a whole country of places that nobody cares about, then you've got a whole country that nobody cares about, you know, and then you've got to think, you know, is this country even worth saving? Well, yes, it is, you know. And you know, you've got to realise that you have to start caring for the country. I know that you do. I'm talking to the listening audience. You have to start caring for the place around you to turn it into a beautiful place, whether it's a castle, whether it's your own home, whether it's a derelict farm, or whether it's $1 million mansion. You've got to care for your own place.
I don't think I've ever told you this, but the property that I'm living on right now, the Finelli farm, was pretty derelict when we bought it. One of our pastures had saplings growing up that were, 6 feet tall. Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, hour number 2 of USAPrepares.com. Guineith Isaacs is with us. There's a link to Guineith's Facebook page on our website, usaprepares.com, usaprepares.com. We're talking about rundown properties. And it seems like Guineith and I could be related. She has the same kind of interest that I do, and Mrs. Finelli does, and our family. It seems it's quite uncanny. And I was talking about this farm that we bought, the one I'm living on right now with my family here in Missouri, middle of nowhere, Missouri. And so, first of all, we were looking for a farm that had very low taxes. We wanted freedom from government help. We didn't want people prodding and poking us, telling us what we will and can't do. So, if you want that kind of a lifestyle, you're going to have to move to where there aren't a lot of people telling you what to do. That means low population density. And also that comes with that is typically low taxes. And so that's what we have. But this farm that we bought was run down, and it had been neglected for decades. One of the fields, it's 40 acres. So classic, a 40-acre field is a quarter of a mile by a quarter of a mile. And it had these saplings that had just grown up because it was pasture, but neglected. So trees start growing, and they grow really quickly. And the trees, well, I mean, they were as tall as our tractor. And the tractor that I'm talking about is 100 horsepower. The tires, the rear tires, are as tall as I am. It takes 3 big steps. There are steps to climb into this thing. There are 3 steps to get to the platform where you can sit on the tractor seat. And in order to, well, we bought the farm at a very reasonable price because it was so neglected and it needed so much work. It needed years of work. And that was 12 years ago, and we're still working on it. Well, I bought a batwing mower. Now, you've seen these batwing mowers. They are about 15 feet wide, and they fold up. So they're in 3 5-foot sections. There's a center section and a left section and a right section. And the right and left sections can fold up, as in wings. And what I did was I took this batwing mower, and I would mow a 5-foot strip because I would destroy the tractor trying to drive over these trees. So I would take a 5-foot cut, and then I'd move in 5 feet, take another cut, and another cut, and another cut. And what I left was stubble of these saplings. And then I would mow it high, maybe almost a foot tall. And then I would lower it, and finally I would get to the point where it'd be about 6 inches tall. And that really, really rough land is quite nice today. And all I did was mow it and show the cows that it could be a nice place for them to hang out. And so between the cows and the mowing, we turned a field that would not be usable into one that the cows just love. It's a quarter of a mile by a quarter of a mile. So it can be done. Now, sometimes it takes equipment. Now, was the equipment expensive? Well, I already had the tractor. And the tractor probably cost about $17,000 used. This is a 12,000-pound tractor with a front-end loader. A batwing mower at that time was really expensive, about $9,000. However, the batwing mower is in great shape. And if I wanted to sell it right now, I could easily get $9,000 for it. Easily. Because it's good quality, and I took care of it. So you need to think about those kinds of things if you're going to buy, one of these derelict properties. Guineith, your thoughts?
Okay, well, I've come from a bit of a different angle because we don't own a tractor, and a tractor is not necessarily going to be so useful here. So the tools that I have for maintaining and looking after my piece of land, I have a spade, I have an axe, I have an electric chainsaw, and I have a star picket. Star pickets are star posts. But here everybody calls them pickets instead of posts for whatever reason. It's a star picket. It's called a whacker, it's a piece of pipe with two handles on it. You put it over the top of the star picker. It's got some lead melted into one end, and you use that for hammering in the star pickets into the ground instead of a sledgehammer. It's a very handy tool. And I have, assorted tools like that. I have a rake and I have forks and that sort of thing. But basically, the maintenance work that needs to be done, if we have any work that absolutely needs a tractor or a bobcat, then I have a friend who owns a bobcat, and I give him a call, and I hire him for the afternoon.
Now, what would that cost, Guineith? If you there are bobcats around here.
Probably around about $100 an hour.
Yeah, that's about the same as what it costs.
For an afternoon's work, it might cost $200 or $300.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, and but you know, it's cheaper for me to do it that way because I would probably only hire him. Oh gosh, maybe about 2 or 3 or 4 times a year.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if you take into account over the years that I've been here, I might have put $2,000 or $3,000 into his pocket.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And that's okay. He has a business. He's a jolly nice old man, and you know, it helps to supplement the regular income that he is on. And I would rather have him, because I don't have any experience in that area, I would rather outsource it to somebody who does have experience in that area. Because, there's also the chance that, that the bobcat would break down and I would have no idea how to fix it, and then it would sit in the garage for however long until, So it's actually better for me if I outsource that area of work. But most things I find on the property I can get done with a spade and with a rake and with a wheelbarrow and with a small chainsaw. I have a McCulloch 18-inch chainsaw, electric chainsaw, and a very, very long extension lead. And I was just walking around on the paddocks the other day, and I was considering that it might actually be worthwhile putting in, you can get outdoor electrical sockets, okay? Mm-hmm. It might be worthwhile installing outdoor electrical sockets onto particular places on the fence line. And I was thinking, gosh, I might be able to use my electric chainsaw another 50 metres out that way if I installed one of these sockets.
Now, when you're talking about driving this from your solar system, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Because we have we have a comparatively big battery, and it would probably get to the point where you'd be thinking, well, I don't think that the current could make it much further. Mm-hmm. But it's a 4 amp. It's a big system. Mm-hmm. It's about 40 amps, okay, a 40 amp inverter, and that's quite a whack of electrical current.
Now, your system is 220 volts, isn't it?
It's 220 volts.
Yeah, so you can go a lot farther than we can in this country because our systems are typically 120 volts. So you've got a lot more push, more voltage.
That's right.
And that's why you can travel so far on an extension cord. We would not be able to do that as well here with an electric saw. But I do want to caution you on one thing. If you decide that you're going to have some wiring out there along your fence line and you have an electrical storm, that lightning, if you have lightning, could hop on that fence.
It could transmit.
And travel right into your inverter. So I would want to disconnect that, anytime I didn't need it. That's how I would handle it.
I think we probably would either that, or I would, look into installing some underground conduit and doing that the proper way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, here's a thought. Since we've digressed a little bit, there are those of us who have electric fences and we want to run wires outside. Well, these long runs of wire are great for attracting lightning. And what we are experimenting with, and we don't have the answer yet, but what we're doing is we are taking the lead wire that powers the fence. We're turning that down toward the ground, vertically down toward the ground, and then making just when we contact the ground, making a sharp U-turn back up with the same wire. And what happens is, theoretically, if lightning hops on that fence, travels down that power line, it'll head down toward the ground. And it's lazy. It doesn't want to make the U-turn and go back up for the rest of the travel into the barn or the house or wherever the power may come from for that electric fence charger. Just a thought, class. Look it up on the internet. Look up DIY, do-it-yourself lightning arresters. Do-it-yourself lightning arresters. You'll find some pretty good diagrams. We'll be right back. Okay, class, I found a really nice image of a lightning arrestor that I was talking about. So I posted it on page 1 of USA Prepare. So if you want to take a look, USAPREPARES.com, it says DIY, do-it-yourself lightning arrestor, poor man's lightning arrestor. Okay, and you'll see that if you're interested. Okay, and it works for all kinds of things. It works for electric fence chargers, and if you've got wire strung on your farm along a fence line, you may want to consider this kind of a technology. It's almost free, almost, except for the piece of wire. But you can have that wire there anyway. So just take a look. I think you'll find it fascinating. Guineith, we're talking about derelict buildings. What would, if you were going to do it all over again, do you have any changes in what you think you would buy, where you'd buy it, what you'd buy, how much you'd pay for it, and what you'd do with it?
Okay. I would probably, make some closer inquiries as to what the local blue team were like.
Yeah.
That's been the real disappointment around here, because of their interference, it's very hard for me to drive anywhere. Mm-hmm. And at the moment it's impossible because I don't have a motor vehicle on the road. And if I fix my motor vehicle that's sitting out in the paddocks, then I would be tempted to use it, and it could be a very unfortunate journey indeed. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's not been fixed and why it's decorating the paddock at the moment. There's actually not that much wrong with it, but that's probably that would be my biggest thing. Okay. Regarding the house itself, I don't think that there's much that I would change about this house. I'll go into a bit of the reason why the people who were living here had to move on after putting so much love and care into this property for so many years. They owned it from 1985 they built this house, and that's 95, and they moved out in 2003, and I bought it in 2013, and in that 10-year span this property was sold 6 times. So, but you know what? I mentioned that they were really, really interested in gardening, okay? They had a bit of an agricultural enterprise that they were running. They had a hemp crop, okay?
So they're making rope,
and They were into rope making, yeah. They had thousands of them, thousands of hemp plants. They must have had quite a rope industry going here. Unfortunately, the local police didn't quite see it that way.
They've got to have something labeled as their target. So yeah. So
yeah,
I just want to.
That's right.
Yeah, by the way, I'm referring to those people on the blue team and the government as peeping Toms, because there is no aspect of our lives that they're not interested in. You know that? Literally. They want to know where we shop, how much we spend, how often we go, what kind of gas we buy, where we buy gas, when we buy gas. They want to know what we watch on the television, how many televisions we have, how many refrigerators, freezers, light bulbs. It's unbelievable what these parasites are interested in. And they are, to me, they're perverts. You've got to have a sick mentality to want to know those things about other people. And when I was growing up, my mother would say, if adults were talking and if they had like an event at our house, when I say event, I mean, let's say they had a few neighbors over, like 5 or 6 couples.
And play.
Well, yeah, or they would say to me, listen, it's okay for you to be here. However, don't go, you don't have to join in the conversation. If there's a few people talking, you don't have to be right in there, okay? You can, sit over there and you can be part of it, but not part of it, okay? What they're telling me is don't eavesdrop on conversations. It is not polite. However, there are people who work for the government who think it is their duty, obligation, and destiny to do that.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, going into another break.
Let's
talk about...
I'll go into some more later after the break.
Yeah, we'll be right back.
Yep.
Guineith Isaacs is with us. In class, I just posted on USA Prepares how surge protectors work as well, so you can get a feel for what's inside those boxes that you plug your electronics into. Guineith, we were talking about, what you might do differently, what you would look for differently, how much you would spend, and how you'd use it. Please continue.
Okay. Now, the good thing about that, they built this house, and they built it for the propagation of plants. Mm-hmm. Along the northeast-facing wall is just windows all the way along. And what that means is that during the summer, and also during the winter as well, but especially during the summer, that half of the house is just absolutely filled with light early in the morning. It's absolutely glorious, and it's perfect for growing out plants. Now, of course, I don't grow out the same sort of plants that they used to. But I have, at the moment I've got a tray of Mangel Wurzel beetroots, okay? The type of beetroot, they're technically a feed beet, but apparently there's absolutely nothing wrong with the taste of them, and they have the potential to be a very, very fine starch staple for a survival situation. And each root weighs between 5 and 10 kilograms when it's mature. And they take, well over 6 months, between 6 and 12 months to actually get to that size, of course. I was thinking, I'm really not able to put in a grain crop here. I don't have a tractor. The soil's not suitable, and we live in the middle of a eucalyptus forest. If I try and plough any ground with the horse, I'm going to hit roots. And I was racking my brains and doing research and thinking what I could use for a starch staple for a survival type situation. And I came across this root called a Mangel Wurzel beetroot, and they grow to be 5 or 10 kilograms, and I was thinking, that's about the same size as a sack of potatoes, and I was looking at my little, tray of seedlings, and I counted them this afternoon, and so far we've had 70 seeds come up, which is quite remarkable. I planted about 120 of them, but the seeds were several years old. and I think that they were about due to, it's best to plant seeds when they're fresh. But if you get seeds that are slightly out of date, it might still be worthwhile planting them because you might get some of them come up. But, right. The front room is absolutely perfect for plant propagation. And as well as that, I propagate cactuses. I propagate prickly pears and various sorts of cactuses that people would want to buy to put in their garden. And, all sorts of other plants. Even up to trees. Like one plant that I would like to begin propagating is willow trees, okay, because they are such a useful plant. Although it's going to be a challenge growing them here because they're really not a dry climate tree. They really are thirsty, but I was thinking, well, we'll see how we go, and I'll see what I can set up so that I can get at least a few willow trees growing, because they're medicinal, because they can be used for basket weaving, because they have such good wood. They are excellent firewood. They're excellent for coppicing, fencing materials, and so on and so forth. But that's one thing about this house that I do absolutely love. And the other thing is there's thousands and thousands and thousands of plant pots all across this property. And apparently they were into propagating something on an industrial scale, because there's just huge numbers of empty plant pots. And that suits me just fine, because it means that any time that I need to pot up 50 or 100 seedlings, then all I need to do is go out and find 50 or 100 plant pots. And so far it hasn't been a problem.
Yep. Well, that's great. That's great. Now, did you look at tax? Did you look at taxes?
What was that, sorry? Taxes.
Did you look at taxes? Yeah.
That's a very interesting issue, because I've found out that the local municipality is a corporation, and under the UCC rules, you don't have to consent to contract with a corporation unless you absolutely want to. So, and they're not only a corporation, they're quite a corrupt corporation. And they're not very nice people. And I don't see why I should buy into their fraudulent extortion racket. And so that is an ongoing issue. But I'm not backing down. And they've already had it to the brink of bringing it to court once and have had to back down, basically because I dug my heels in and pointed out that they're actually an extortionate racket. And so, you know, it's something where I'll have to keep you posted on upcoming developments on that one. But if everybody looked into that, they would realise that most local municipalities are actually not bona fide governments. They're extortion rackets. Mm-hmm. And if we all stood up against them, and if we all fought them and pointed out the fact that they're operating a racketeering scam, charging us money so that we can live on our own land, which is basically a protection racket, then there's no way that any of these corrupt municipalities would even be in existence. Yeah, and that's
so
just how it is.
Your point, as I understand it, is if they were a bona fide government with taxing authority that was granted by the people, that would be one thing. However, these are corporations posing as bona fide governments, which they are not. So it would be kind of like Kellogg's, the cornflakes company, implementing a tax and requiring you to pay it. whether or not
yeah,
you
and
bought their
requiring that I
cornflakes.
buy their cornflakes.
Okay.
I have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
it's exactly the same problem that I have with this municipality.
Mm-hmm.
And so any of their services that I use, I pay cash for them at the time when I use them, you know. And I don't have,
let me ask you, what would that be?
Well, things like the community
What services would...
the swimming pool, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And any of their services that they operate, you know, like the community centre where they have like internet access and, you know, somewhere to sit and have a cup of tea, the swimming pool, things like this. I pay for them.
Do they have a posted fee schedule there that says if you don't live here, meaning if you're not a taxpayer, is really what they mean. Here are the out of area fees. How do they delineate this? Or they just have your name next to a fee schedule?
Well, it's like this. The community centre, you can pay an annual membership to use the community centre if you want to use it.
Everybody pays. So everybody pays.
No, if you want to. But, you know,
I see.
If you're not a member of the community centre, then they don't have your name down, and then you have to pay a higher fee if you want to use their facilities. But if you use it on a regular basis, the membership fee is like $15 a year or something, so it's worthwhile. Mm-hmm. Paying the $15 and then paying the lower charge each time you want to go and use their facilities, you know. And like the swimming baths, it's just whoever shows up can use the swimming pool, but you pay like $2 door charge. Mm-hmm. And they have, you know, a kiosk where they sell, you know, popsicles and, you know, lollies and chips for the kids.
Right.
You know, and cans of Coca-Cola and things like that, and probably fruit juices and boxed drinks, and, you know, I don't think they have hot food and coffee there. But, you know, it's a pay-as-you-go thing with the swimming pool, and it doesn't matter if you're just passing through or if you're a resident there, you pay the same amount of money to use the swimming pool.
So but
it's managed by the municipality.
Let's make this clear, that we're not against government, legal, above-board, honest, reasonable, minimal government. We're not against that. What we have a problem with is corporations posing as government that are oppressive, that will jail you, shoot you, kill you, incarcerate you, beat you up, and then their rules say, but you know that we have an oversight group, and it's, you know, that beating that you got, that's okay, because it's within our guidelines to do that. Yeah.
But they're self-admittedly, in documents as supplied to me, they've admitted they're a body corporate.
Yep. We'll be right back, and I'll let you know some of my thoughts. Gwyneth Isaacs is with us, and we're talking about derelict properties, rundown properties, and you can save an enormous amount of money if you want to put in some elbow grease, muscle capital, if you'd like. And so some of the things that I looked for when we were buying this property, and these are things that I'd look for right now if I were buying another one. I'd want to be on a dirt road. Why? Because a dirt road is a barrier to entry. You know, these big holes and dips in the road and rocks, and, you know, those with these shiny new cars, they don't want to come down our dirt road. So it's a barrier to entry. I'm looking for land that you really can't see all of it. And I'd like a house site on that. First of all, it'd be a farm, of course. But I would want a house site on the farm that is not visible. But I would like it to be in a clearing in the woods with maybe 150 feet or so to the nearest tree. And I'd like trees that are at least 50, 60, 70 years old surrounding the house site. I would like freedom from government help. I want no regulations. What I'm talking about is no electrical permit, no building permits, no building inspections, none of that. I want to do it myself. And I don't want the government coming and checking it out and telling me what I can and can't do. I would like no homeowners association kinds of things. No nearby cell towers. No industry in the area. Why? Because typically industry that's been in any small hamlet has polluted the water system. Whether it be a textile plant or whatever manufacturing does. They have oils and lubricants and so forth and toxic chemicals, and it ends up in the water no matter what they do. I'd like a southern exposure so that I could have my solar panels facing the south. I'd like some hills and valleys and draws. And I'd like rolling land. I'd like pasture for cows. I'd like hay fields for growing hay to winter the cows. I'd like a good well area, a location where I could put in a good well. I'd like woods. I'd like a stream. And I'd like good soil. I'd like some flat land. Of course, some rolling hills. Lots of privacy. And it'd be great if it already had a fence around it. If not, I'd like an area where I could put a fence around it. Those are many of the thoughts. Of course, I would like it to be tax-free if possible. I would like a low sales tax rate if possible. If not, no sales tax. That would be my first choice. And then if I didn't have to pay real estate taxes, I would really like that. I'd like to have nice neighbors. And what we did before we bought our farm here in Missouri was we met the neighbors. We said, hi. We didn't ask anybody for permission to meet the potential neighbors. Mrs. Finelli and I just drove up to their houses. Said, hi, we're thinking about buying this property and like to meet our potential neighbors. Because typically that's not what's done. What's typically done is you get a job and then you find out the job is in Cleveland and you're going to move to Cleveland. You call realtors and you pick one that you like and the realtor shows you some houses and then you end up buying a house, and after you buy the house then you meet the neighbors. Well, that's crazy. I want to meet the neighbors before. And we traveled miles and miles in all directions around this particular farm. We looked for electrical substations. There's not one for miles. There's no cell tower for miles. We wanted to look at, how well people maintained what property they had. It didn't have to be an expensive property. It just had to be one that they didn't feel that their front yard was a landfill, or their backyard or the side yard. Yep. Any final thoughts in the last 20 seconds?
I would say that's a pretty good shopping list. And if I was going to do it all again, I would probably have a similar shopping list, but with less of an emphasis on the flatlands and fields. I would be happy to just live in a forest, and but like I said, I have a different style of farming than probably what most people have.